A grandfather says to his little 6-year-old granddaughter, I'll give you $1, a whole dollar, if you can tell me where God is. And this young little girl, pretty smart and astute young girl, says, Grandpa, I'll give you $2 if you can tell me where God is not. Pretty smart, pretty astute for sure. As it says in scriptures, and a little child shall lead them. You know, over the years, I've had the experience, the opportunity, maybe you've had it as well, where someone comes up to you and says, have you found God? And I always turn to them and look at them straight in the eye and I say, I didn't know she was missing. Oh my goodness, I'll go out and look for her right now. So welcome those of you who are watching our Unity of Monroe YouTube channel. I appreciate you tuning in. You probably have the luxury of sleeping a little bit longer than those who are here today on this beautiful Sunday of the clock changing. And so those who are here today, I appreciate you coming out. Today I begin this new 3-part Spring Sunday series called Questions on the Quest. Questions on the Quest. A while back, I was cleaning some stuff out, getting rid of some stuff, recycling some stuff, repurposing some stuff. And I came across some old Unity magazines. And some of these were quite old, so I was kind of skimming through them. And back in the days when I first came into Unity in the 1800s, this was one of the first things I had the opportunity to read. Why? Because I had kind of a mentality, like I wanted a quick hit, just, a little article, something to read. I didn't want to read a big, huge tome or volume by Charles Fillmore or, the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. It seemed a little imposing then. But Unity Magazine was perfect, and I always was drawn to usually the middle of Unity Magazine because there was this continuous column and articles entitled Questions on the Quest. So one of my first introductions was that. Questions on the Quest was this monthly writing, if you will, by a man named Dr. Marcus Bach. Now, Dr. Bach was not a Unity minister. He was a very well-known author and writer, and very well-known in the religious and spiritual circles. And he wrote for many years, drawing from the vast knowledge that he had of world religions. And Dr. Bach wrote on these things. He wrote some 25 plus books, my friends, quite a few. Marcus Bach was also the uncle of Richard Bach. You may know him from being the author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull and a few other books as well. And he was one of the first, Dr. Bach was one of the first people who really examined what Unity taught and then wrote about it. He knew Charles Fillmore personally, talked with him and interviewed him back in the 1940s, the early 40s. And he later put together this book from this whole bunch of articles from Unity Magazine, Questions on the Quest. Became a book that was published by Harper Row, one of those companies down through the years. So, of course, the title alone, when you look at that, when you think about Questions on the Quest, kind of piques your interest, or at least it piques my interest, and that's why I probably picked it up back in those days, because it's like the recognition that we're all on this journey. And life to me has always been about questioning. When mom or dad used to say, you have to do it this way, Greg. Maybe you had this experience too. Maybe you had a questioning mind saying, why? Why do I have to put my toys back where they belong? Why do I have to close the door? Why do I have to do this? And it wasn't being ornery or obstinate. It just simply was, I want to know the reason why. Now think about the life experience you've gone through, the quest, because it's always a quest. When we're on a quest, we're on a journey. We're trying to discover what? More of who we are. Or to find out who we are. Maybe we found out some of that. We're on a quest to find the depth of a relationship or relationship with life, with other people. We're on a journey to find a connection we have with spirit, with life. And sometimes we have to ask those questions, friend. We have to ask those questions of ourselves. Most of the time, the search has been a search where we discovered something, we uncovered something. But hopefully we didn't just stay there, because the quest is an ongoing thing. And this is why I think it's important to always ask the questions on the quest, because can we ever really be satisfied? Maybe at that point in time, but there's a new satisfaction that comes along each and every day, each and every moment. Life is about asking questions of ourselves and of life itself. So Dr. Bach, in writing these particular articles, questions that people would submit, one of the main ones was on the search for God, which of course is a question that has been in all religions, faith, and traditions down through the years. On the search for God, all too often, faiths have said, this is what God is or isn't. Often not inviting or even allowing us to question, well, who says it is? If you say God is this, who's to say that God is not this? So questioning is important to remember as part of our journey, our trek, if you will. When you think about all the people, the philosophers, the priests, the prophets, the poets, and the painters over the years, what have they tried to do? They tried to portray an image of what God is. You think about if you walk into a museum, Cincinnati Art Museum or some place like that, and you go in there and you see some of the Middle Ages authors, or not authors, but artists and things like that, painters. What do you see? You see these interesting images, beautiful art, but you see this interesting imagery of what they perceived, what these individual human beings perceived as God. We look at something as, well known as the Sistine Chapel, and we have this image of God and man together, Adam and mankind, as mankind and God coming together, and a beautiful representation of something that was part of the mindset or consciousness of the artist. But is that just an invitation for us to understand what God is? And dare I say that a lot of people have drawn from that imagery of God as that being right there. So this search goes on from looking at what has been imaged and what has been written about, what has been painted, what has been made into statues for, God and humankind. But the question is, what does that mean to us? What is it, the depth of consciousness, the depth of what the search for God means to us? Think about how God has been portrayed over the years. When you look at the Old Testament, we see a God of war. We see a God of vengeance. We see a God of striking people down, entire races of people. And then when we come to the New Testament, we see, as one young girl said, that God certainly got a lot better when he got older, Well, that's true, but we also think about the fact that these were books, writings by people who are just trying to understand the search for God for them. And now 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years later, we find this inspiration. We find this way of understanding things. And we're on our own search. We're on our own journey. A literal understanding of those things, whether it's Bible or whether it's, looking at the literal painting of God and man touching fingers, the literal understanding of that then takes us away from any kind of personal interpretation or something within us that brings us to a fuller, richer understanding of how our consciousness develops and moves. The Jewish writers, as I've said over the years, did not write for posterity. They wrote for what? They wrote for inspiration. They wrote to bring people back into the faith, to quicken them in that faith. And so the descriptions of God are always and always have been colored by what they had in consciousness. They looked at the cosmos and saw it in one particular way, as we do as well. because it's all about the consciousness. It's about our understanding of faith. It doesn't mean that it's not right or it's wrong. It's just that's the interpretation. Now we ask questions of it and we say, what does that mean on my own quest? In our own search for depth and meaning. Most of us then came from something very different than what we teach in Unity and in New Thought. A different tradition, a different background, a different belief. Less in the idea of a presence and activity of God in the fullness of life, and more of an absence. As I said over the years, we've learned more about the absence of God than the presence of God. The presence of God in every phase of life and living. And anytime we're separate from that, we're not separate from something that God has given unto us. We're separate only in mind, in the midst of who and what we are. So in our own search, we're recognizing that we didn't learn as much about the presence of God. We learned more about God separate. That sense of God in the realms above us, beyond us, like in the Sistine Chapel painting. Rarely did we hear of the idea entertained of the experience of having God as an immanent process, an immanent presence, but also the transcendence of God, which is there in every phase of life, and recognizing that God is both immanent and transcendent. God is immanent within each and every one of us, each and every soul. God within us and in all creation. But God is also transcendent beyond whatever we can categorize God as. What is God? The minute I say God is this, what have I done? I put God in a box. The whole idea of the questions on the quest is about getting God out of the box to expand our consciousness. If we think of that box as our consciousness, our home, to see and feel the presence of God in each and every whole and holy moment, but also to know and to be able to define and try to understand in the next phase of life and living, what is God? And so God is both immanent within, God is transcendent in all of creation. All of that factors into an awareness of this idea, as we say, of the omnipresence, the omnipotence, and the omniscience of what God is. The challenge, of course, is the minute we say, and the minute I say something like, God and I are one. You and God are one. We're in oneness with God. What have I done? God and I. God and I. You and God. And immediately there's that sense of separation. There's that sense of what I like to affectionately call two-ness. You know, two-ness? Here's God, here's me. Here's God, here's you. Instead of oneness. How does our vocabulary, how do our words make that into something where we simply understand this power of oneness? There's only one presence and one power. Think about the analogy we've used over the years of the water, the drop of water that contains all the properties, the prime properties of that particular water. And when Jesus said, I and the Father are one, he was talking about and trying to invite us into that presence beyond two-ness, but into oneness. But again, we're limited by our vocabulary, our words. This idea of that drop of water containing all the properties of the ocean, of the lake, of whatever it may happen to be, is an example of how it all comes into focus and into understanding that God is in the very depth of our conscious awareness of what God is. We'll call it unity consciousness. We'll call it a oneness of consciousness. We'll call it the whole of spirit that is present in its entirety at every point in time and space. So that means God is here right now in this place. God is there with you as you are watching this. God is in your travels. God is in this moment. God is in the world. God is in conflicts around this world. We must never forget the presence and power of God. God is mighty in the midst of those moments that are very profound, and God is mighty in the midst of those moments that confound. And we've all been there. Those profound moments, those confounding moments. Confounded. Living in two-ness does what? It separates us from God. So what is living in two-ness for you? T-W-O-N-E-S-S. We've all been there. The minute I try to separate myself from someone and say, well, Carol is this or that, and, or Carl is this or that, the ability to withhold love from someone is a sense of two-ness, is it not? Or to withhold love from, or to pass a judgment of some sort and say, well, God is in this person, but not in that person. God is in this community, but not in that community. Or we have that sense of separation. We create a separation between us and God. And so there's that invitation that's very ripe in that moment for a healing to take place. A healing where we understand the omniscience, the power of God. There is only one presence, one power. God is that presence in all things and in all ways. And as we affirm that thing, it helps create a consciousness that lifts us up. It helps us create and accept that presence of God, that God is present in all things because God is. God is. Eric Butterworth, in many of his writings, talked about this oneness of God. In fact, I would turn you on or invite you to, if you haven't read it for a long time, or just pick up Discover the Power Within You. One of the best metaphysical New Thought books there is. Discover the Power. And Eric Butterworth talks about it, says, God in us is the Holy Spirit, or the whole of spirit. Love that. The whole of divine mind, the whole of divine love, the whole of infinite substance is in you and in focus as you at every moment in time, wherever you may be, wherever I am, God is in his entirety. As you walk, talk, live, move, and breathe. There is no spot where God is not. Maybe another way of saying it, a more simple way of saying it than what Butterworth is saying here. Butterworth. And his wife, Mrs. Butterworth, by the way. She was a lovely, kind of syrupy kind of woman. Did I say that? Terrible. Oneness brings us to this idea that, I cannot see myself apart from God except in the midst of my mind. I cannot see myself apart from anything else, because it's kind of like the analogy of the fish swimming around in the ocean all day looking for water. As the mystic poet and saint of India, Kabir, talked about, he said, I laugh when I hear that the fish in the water is thirsty. You don't grasp the fact that what is most alive of all is inside your own house. House representing what? Consciousness, awareness. That when we're looking for things, we're striving to search for God, all too often we've placed God out here. Nothing wrong with understanding that. God is transcendent, but God is also in the recognition of heart, faith, soul. What moves us, what strengthens and empowers us. All of that works toward the good, if you will, in our search for God. The Latin word spiritus, if you're familiar with that word, the Latin word spiritus, which is where we get the word spirit within you, means what? The Latin word spiritus means life, to breathe, to live. So when you breathe in spiritus, spirit, you're breathing life. You're breathing energy into that thing. Spirit then is the principle of life, or divine breath. Divine breath breathing in and through you and as you and in the universe. When Jesus said God is spirit, they must worship in spirit and truth. We must worship in spirit and truth. It was less about Jesus trying to define God and say, here's what God is. But the invitation was simply to direct our thoughts away from finite things and into the infinite of God, the immanence and transcendence of God. All of that plays into that. So invite yourself along with this quest and the questions on the quest, because you're all on a quest. We're all on this journey of life. And the quest is to find more of the depth of what God can be and what God is. And it's always moving us and challenging us and lifting us up. It's always recognizing that we must worship in spirit and truth. It's always recognizing that in that house, as Kabir talked about, is our consciousness, and our consciousness is activated the more we ask the questions and sit in those moments of quiet and contemplation and listen. We cannot change the closeness, which is the presence, the power, and the fullness of God, the light of God within and around us. So invite yourself to keep on keeping on, my friends, to keep on keeping on this endless journey, this endless trek we're on. Some of us would like, I think, to have like, this is what it is. This is my completion moment. But life is never about that. Life is always about onward and upward processing. So let us always keep on keeping on, searching for the spirit, the breath, the life that is within us, keeping on that quest and asking questions on the quest. And I hope you can join me next Sunday, part 2 on our journey and on spirituality and religion. So let's take a moment more to find that depth, that quality of spirit, of breath, of life in us. And I invite you to just sit back and relax now and just take a moment to find a place of comfort for yourself as you place your feet comfortably on the floor in front of you, as you place your hands by your side or there in your lap. And just be aware as you breathe in this moment. And as you release and let that go, that this is a spiritual journey. This is a journey of life. This is a journey of joy and anticipation. Speak words of comfort and joy and peacefulness. To speak it to your mind and your body, from your head to your toe. I speak the words clearly of peace, of wisdom, and of understanding. Breathe in, breathe out, and acknowledge in this whole and holy moment, there is but one presence. There is but one power. This process I own and understand right now. On my search for God, on my search for what life reveals, the Spirit of God within, the Spirit of life in all. I honor this wonderful, wild walk of life. And whatever I uncover this day in this moment is rewarded by a fuller understanding of my oneness with all of life, a fuller, deeper respect for the beauty and wonder of creation. Yes, loving presence, Spirit in me. I walk in that blessing as all do, on this search to uncover and reveal a closeness, a oneness, a depth. I am grateful for this blessing of spiritual understanding and wisdom. And I go into each and every moment with anticipation and eagerness, because my journey is still in a process of discovering more and even greater things than these. So I invite myself now to take a moment, letting my heart be open and ready to reveal greater truth, greater wisdom, my consciousness to be willing to gift me with a fuller, richer understanding in the search for God. God is and I am. God is and all are. As I define and own and understand the wisdom and the truth of Spirit, I also declare in this moment that it is even grander and greater than I can even begin to understand. And I hold that truth and that wisdom for all. Now let us join together on this journey, in the search for God, just listening in stillness, listening in quiet, listening in this sense of calmness, in the search for God. In the silence. In our search for meaning, in my search for a depth and a closeness, a oneness with all of creation, I am quickened and lifted up this day, inspired by this long, beautiful, and wild trek I call life. My search for God, I see and perceive the omniscience and omnipresence and the omnipotence in all things. Thank you, God. And so it is.